What's up, guys? Welcome to the first video episode of Young, Hot, and Divorced. I'm your host, Tori Gottlieb, and the pressure is on today. I definitely don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I feel weird about holding the mic like this. I don't know where to hold it. I don't know how to hold it. So this is a new one for me, but hopefully it turns out all right. So with that introduction, I wanted to give this disclaimer that I've definitely been in a place where I would not be able to listen to a podcast like this or just even entertain these topics or discussions. So I want you to know that we're going to be talking about trying to conceive, abortion, loss, birth, all of it. And I know that that's a sensitive topic. I think I've always chosen to loudly share my story within my close group of family and friends. So this is not a secret by any means, but it's definitely not something that I or most people would think to publicize. And I'm not saying this is publicized, but shared publicly, I would say. And that floats around the entire idea that I think is a common theme throughout most of what I discuss, which is shame. I thought long and hard about how I was going to share this journey with you guys, and I thought the best way to do it was chronologically. The story begins 2 months after I met my first ex-husband. So we had been dating exclusively for about 2 months at this point, and no shame in this game, but I got pregnant. I had known this man for 2 months, and while things are going great, I have absolutely no idea where this is going to go. He's 13 years older than me, and I at the time was maybe newly 20 in college. So having a baby was not on my to-do list, but at the time I remember thinking, well, it's totally doable. We have a place to live. He's 33. We would be okay. But I really wanted to finish school, and I'm super glad that I did. We decided to have an abortion, and truthfully, I think that that experience brought us closer at the time. We didn't share it at the time with our friends or family. It was something that we kept between us. It was something that bonded us, that we had created a child together and shared that experience. So from there, of unintentionally getting pregnant until we decided to get married, I was on birth control. So just to share, I was on the depot shot for quite a few years, from when we first started dating all the way until we were just about to get married. So the depot shot lasts in your system for 3 months. And since I had been getting it for so many years and I had had the abortion, not that that affects your ability to conceive, but it was just in my mind that I wanted to have babies quickly. Husband at the time was, he still is, but he was my husband at the time. He was, or still is, 13 years older. I thought we were kind of ready to get this show on the road. So I stopped getting my shot a couple months before we decided to get married, because you really have no idea how long it's going to take you to conceive. So I stopped getting my shot and I start taking the pill. And I take the pill until literally the month of our wedding. I think I stopped taking it October 1st. We were getting married October 14th. And shortly after we got married, very shortly, like around Thanksgiving, I would say, we got pregnant for the first time. And that was super exciting. I was freaking out. I had already done all my research. I had watched like a ton of YouTube videos. I was in the know of how to track your ovulation, and I was ecstatic. My ex-husband at the time wasn't as involved in that whole process of tracking and trying as much, but I obviously did, and it worked really quickly. And that was such a relief. So I'm pregnant for maybe just a couple of weeks. It was really early. I don't think I had made it to my 8-week appointment yet at this point, but I had definitely gotten multiple positive pregnancy tests. The lines were getting darker. It was everything that I had seen what it should be. So I am at work one day, and I worked in New York City at the time. And I remember just feeling this, like nothing I had felt before. I never had a heavy period, and this was just strange. So I went to the bathroom, and it was just so clear that this wasn't my period. This was a miscarriage. It was just different. And I was mortified. Not to be too graphic, but there is a decent amount of blood in my pants right now. And I don't have a tampon. I just found out I was pregnant. Like, I'm not getting my period in my mind. So this was also not around the time where I should have been getting my period. And I had already skipped a period. So I wasn't expecting this. And I remember having to explain to my boss what had happened. You obviously don't, I mean, some people do, but I didn't announce my pregnancy right away. So I had to be like, oh, I'm pregnant, but by the way, I'm also having a miscarriage right now. Luckily, I worked for an amazing woman and it was all women in the office. So this isn't as bad as it could have been, but I had to walk and go get a pad because I had seen everywhere, like, you're not supposed to use a tampon if you have a miscarriage. So I get like a giant pad and I'm wearing it and I can't get through the day. At this point, I'm just not as emotionally a mess as I am physically. Like, I can't stay. You know what I mean? And she completely understood and I left. And when I got home, my ex-husband picked me up from the train. And I think there's this time period where you're like, oh, you don't know, you're not sure. But like, yeah, that's pretty alarming and scary. And once we went to the doctor, we were sure. And that was a really disappointing experience. I figured because I was very healthy, there was not going to be anything wrong. I've later learned that that's not what matters, and these things happen for a variety of reasons. But it definitely shook me. I had mixed feelings about this because on one hand, I'm like, awesome, I know I can get pregnant. And on the other hand, I'm like, whoa, like this could also be a really emotional journey. And gosh, this is already hurting and got a little scarier. It went from, I think, like that fantasy of just being in bliss and just getting married and deciding to have a baby and going through that process and it being filled with joy. And all of a sudden, I realized that that can be tainted a little bit with some sadness. And after all is said and done, I'm not trying to downplay the pain that this causes, but I will say that it is a natural part of the journey. I think that one way or another, not everything in this trying to conceive journey goes to plan. I think whether it's your birth plan didn't go to plan, or you had a miscarriage, or gender disappointment. There are a million things, you know, an unexpected NICU stay. I could go on forever of things that could derail your perfect fantasy of pregnancy. So that was kind of the first shock to my system. Fortunately, almost a month later, I got pregnant again. That was super exciting. I remember telling my parents right away. We were so excited. I was excited to come up with some cute little way to tell everybody because I had just gone through my wedding. So I did like I don't know what they're called, bridesmaid proposal boxes, and I was so into that, like the asking my siblings to be my flower girl and the ring bearer. You get all these cute personalized things. So I couldn't wait to get a onesie that said like grandpa on it or something. And it was expected, I would say, from everybody. I remember my dad at my wedding in his speech was like, all right, now make some grandkids. And I definitely did. I pulled through on that one. So next part of the story is my pregnancy with Jackson. And I didn't know what to expect in my pregnancy with Jackson. It's my first pregnancy. Everything was going really well with my pregnancy with Jackson and really normal. I would say I had a little bit of morning sickness in the first trimester, totally normal. I did gain a lot of weight with Jackson. I remember by the end of my pregnancy, this might shock you, I think I weighed, if not the same, maybe more than my ex-husband. It was a lot. I was huge. And Jackson was big. I'm 5 feet tall. I say I'm 5'1" on a good day. Jackson was almost 8 pounds. And like, where is an 8-pound baby going in me? I remember having to like push him out of my ribs. It was very uncomfortable, especially towards the end. And Jackson was due on September 2nd, which was Labor Day of that year. And that was super exciting and easy for me to remember because I was supposed to be going into labor on Labor Day. And he decided to come one day early. And I was thrilled because at that point I was so over being pregnant. The thought of him being late was just like, oh my God, get him the fuck out of me. And when I went into labor, first of all, that shit fucking hurts. I remember just being so ready to go. We get to the hospital and I'm planning on having a vaginal birth. I am totally open to whatever happens, just what's safest for the baby and I. I wasn't one of those people that had like a hardcore birth plan. I think I was pretty aware that this was out of my control. And while I may have had preferences, this wasn't about my preferences. It was about what was safest for myself and the baby. I'm in labor with Jackson. I think like between 4 and 6, we were definitely headed to the hospital. Being in triage was the worst because at that point you are waiting for the epidural. So shit's going down pretty fast. And like, this is painful and you're trying to breathe through it. And I say this to everybody who gets pregnant. I say, you're going to get to the hospital and they're going to ask you, your name for your health insurance, the name of your doctor, all this stuff. And I say to everybody, I'm going to lean in close for this one. You just look whoever you're talking to in the eye and you say epidural. What's your name? Epidural. Who's your doctor? Epidural. What's your address? Epidural. Will you fill out this form? Epidural. When's the last time you ate? Epidural. I'm not kidding. These anesthesiologists can get busy. Your labor can progress quickly. And if you would like an epidural, you better fucking be vocal about it. It's possible that you just fucking dilate too quickly and don't have time for that. And if that's something that you wanted, which it was something that I definitely wanted, I always say that they are the best drugs I've ever had. That epidural experience is unlike any other. The relief after getting the epidural, at that point, you don't even fucking care that there is a foot-long needle in your spine. You are just like, anything to make this more bearable. And once it becomes bearable, another fucking world. You're just sitting there dilating away, looking, you can have some visitors. It's taking its time and you're just waiting at that point. So, 8 centimeters. Okay, we get to 10. 10 centimeters means it's time to push. So at this point, maybe you get like your friends and family out of the room. At this point, it was just my ex-husband and I, and blacked out for a chunk of time. I just remember the end. I know that I pushed for 2.5 hours, which is a lot. I was very against the use of forceps. That was just my personal preference. And 2.5 hours of pushing was exhausting. Even though it wasn't super painful, it took everything out of me. And by the time that 2.5 hours comes around and the doctor comes through a couple of times, I'm just like, get this thing out of me. Get this thing out of me. I kind of expected that I would have a C-section, just me being anatomically small. I didn't really see how Jackson was coming out of my vagina. So we have the C-section, easy C-section. It was like something like 20 minutes. The second one is longer, but the first one was really quick. It's a really interesting experience being on an operating table and being awake during that time. Most operations, you would be under general anesthesia and you don't hear the protocol and the noises in the room, but with a C-section, you do. You also get to see your spouse's face. And that's like an underrated thing, their reaction to the whole thing, because you're on the table, you have no choice. So I remember getting the C-section. Your arms are on like these arm holders, like you're on the cross. And it very well feels like that as you're being sliced open. And there comes a point where they're moving your organs inside of you, like to get to where they need to get to. And I was nauseous, like you've never been nauseous before, and just so suddenly. And I was like, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up. And the second time I got pregnant, I knew to ask for the vomit bowl a little bit sooner. I didn't realize how quickly I was going to throw up. And I just threw up all over the floor, like just vomited. Then they put the little vomit bucket next to me. I don't remember if I threw up again. So something I wasn't totally expecting about the C-section that I hadn't heard about was that moment when you can feel very nauseous from them doing that. And like I was saying, you could hear all of the protocols being spoken in the room. Everybody in the room announces themselves. And when they're getting, I remember, them getting to the uterus, like they call out uterus. And it's just an incredible experience if you're not in the medical field. I think it's pretty cool to have that. And I'm always amazed at how good the drug must be in your spine to be able to cut you open like that on every layer, skin, muscle, fat, organ, like, and let me tell you, ow, if you've had a C-section, ow, that fucking recovery is So my pregnancy with Jackson was what I would call almost textbook, really typical, no real surprises. But then came a very big surprise. And that surprise showed up 90 days after I had given birth to Jackson. And here's how I found out about that surprise. So I was going out with my ex-husband and a couple of our friends for brunch in the city. It was going to be the first time that I was going to drink since having Jackson. I decided I was going to pump and dump. And if you don't know what that means, it means you were going to pump your breast milk and dump it, throw it out because it was containing alcohol. So at the time, I was breastfeeding Jackson. I had heard through various sources that it was very rare to have another baby or be able to get pregnant while you're breastfeeding. And I didn't really think too much about it. I mean, how much sex are you having 30, 60, 90 days after having a C-section? Probably not enough to like make you worried. And at the time, you're not having any sort of normal period. You're having bleeding from giving birth, and it's all kind of confusing. You really don't have any way of knowing if you're even able to. I'm out drinking and enjoying my mimosa or Bellini or whatever brunch little champagne cocktail that I'm having. And we get home. And I must have had a pregnancy test laying around from when I was pregnant with Jackson, because I can't understand why I would have one at all. There are different kinds of tests. There are tests where it's like ink tests, so it's either 2 lines or A plus. There are tests that either say yes or no, or have like a smiley face or a sad face. And there are some tests that say pregnant or not pregnant. And I had the first one that I had was the one that says yes or no. And I took the test. I really wasn't thinking much of it, but I was kind of like, oh, better safe than sorry. The test is sitting here. Why not? You know, I'm so fresh off this pregnancy journey that it's kind of like top of mind. And I take the test and I'm washing my hands and I don't think much of it. But if you know anything about pregnancy tests, the stronger the line in a ink test is the same as like a digital test. So the digital test will read the ink test that's inside. And the faster that line comes up and becomes obvious, it means like the more pregnant you are. You have more of the HCG hormone in your system. Or you could be pregnant with multiples. And God bless you if you are, because I did something quite similar. So the pregnancy test said yes right away. I'm in my bathroom and all the doors are open and my son and my ex-husband are downstairs. And I just say, oh, fuck, pretty loudly, not like screaming, but he hears me, and I go downstairs and show him the test. And I know how babies are made, but I truly have no idea how Shay was conceived. I have zero recollection of having sex at that time. I know that I did, but I couldn't have done it too many times. Shay's conception timeline is very confusing. I get pregnant with Shay and it's so soon and I feel so guilty that Jackson's just a baby and I don't want him to lose that first year of being with his mother and my attention being split with the pregnancy and then quickly after another baby. So Shay was due to be a year and a week younger than Jackson, and it would have been separate grades, you know, just like almost like, oh, a year apart kind of situation. Jackson was due like September 2nd. Shay was going to be due September 15th. The beginning of Shay's pregnancy, I also had that nausea, but it was so much worse. With Jackson, I think maybe I threw up once. It was so much worse and didn't get better. And I had what you call, I say this wrong every time, it's what Amy Schumer had, it's hyperemesis gravidum, I don't know. But for short, we're going to call it HG, which means that you just have really severe vomiting while pregnant. When I say severe on the phone, like, oh, I think I'm like throwing up a lot. They're like, well, if you can keep down a cap full of water, you're okay. So you think to yourself, a cap full of water, who can't keep down a cap full of water? Everybody can keep down a cap full of water. Well, when I tell you not everybody can keep down a cap full of water. I am saying that that's a real thing. And at that point, it was the beginning of COVID and lockdown had started and the hospitals were being used for people who were really sick with COVID at the time. If you remember, cases that weren't urgent were not being taken in the hospital. So at that time, I needed to be on IV fluids and I had a at-home health nurse come and administer my IV. And I was taught how to unscrew the IV and replace the bag and flush the IV and be able to do the spiking of the bag with the vitamins and whatever I needed to stay hydrated. And mind you, this entire time I have Jackson, who is 3 months old, 6 months old, 9 months old, and Shay comes early. Shay's birth is a little more traumatic and not what I was expecting at all. I had a scheduled C-section for 38 weeks with Shay, and we knew the day he was going to be born. It was actually going to be September 2nd because that's when the doctor I wanted was on, and I obviously didn't want the birthday to be the same as Jackson's, and that's when the 38-week mark was. So I thought that was going to be so cool. They were a year and a day apart. And that's not what happened. Shay was born in the really early morning. So I went into labor on August 3rd in the evening. And I was kind of surprised about it. This is my second kid at the time. And I think that I'm bearing through it. It's kind of a slower progression. And I'm not sure if it's the real thing. I'm also pretty tough, but I'm keeping track of it. And I remember at the time we had some sort of contractor or cabinet guy coming to the house to look at the kitchen cabinets that we were redoing. And I kind of kept it to myself. And then as the cabinet guy is leaving, I say to my ex-husband, I don't know, maybe we should call my mom to come watch Jackson because I'm definitely having contractions. And I called the doctor. He's like, wait until they get X amount apart. And before I knew it, that's where we were. It was real labor. And we went to the hospital and we arrived shortly before the switch of the doctors. And because the shift was going to be happening, they weren't going to be giving me an epidural until the doctor that was going to be on shift after 11 o'clock gave the okay. So I had to wait for this doctor to show up to give the okay, da 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 da. There was definitely some sort of hesitancy, I would say, to not necessarily stop the labor, but it was early. It was early enough that they wanted to give me 2 rounds of steroid shots, but I wasn't able to do that. I only got 1. It was a different experience for sure. So I get the epidural and we're going to get the C-section, and they give me like a heads up that the C-section this time around will be probably like about an hour, and I know what to expect at this point. I'm not super concerned about him coming early because I had a completely normal delivery with Jackson, and he wasn't so early that it was super concerning. He was early that like it could be totally fine, and early that like something could be wrong or like a little wrong. So there was definitely NICU staff in the room, and I was kind of out of it for this one, but I knew to ask for the vomit bowl, and I had it next to me, and I did throw up again. That's kind of like not a shocker. I literally threw up the entire pregnancy. This part is kind of crazy. This I remember. I'm on the cross situation, and they're working on me. They're like cutting away over there, and the arm rest drops, and this thing is like metal, and it's scary. Like you have to jump when this thing falls, and like I'm probably twitched. Honestly, I don't think I could feel myself, so I don't know if I jumped or whatever. But the surgeon performing the surgery, I would have been like, so if you're a surgeon, I'm dying to know how you stay cool and calm while cutting and being so precise with people's bodies if you hear like a sudden and loud noise in the operating room. So Shay is born, and right away, babies are kind of like funky looking when they come out. I remember Jackson's head was all cone head because I had been pushing him for 2.5 hours. So don't worry if that happens to you. It does go down and fairly quickly. So just a hat on the head for the early days is good. Shay comes over, they bring him over, and he looks a little purple, like a little blue, and he was just inside of me. I'm not expecting him to come out like fucking Brad Pitt, you know? They take him away, they bring him back over, and I see that he's got the little cannula for oxygen on his nose. And like, oh, okay, you know, they're gonna take him to the NICU for some sort of evaluation and nothing major. I'm kind of like expecting it a little bit, and I'm being brought to the recovery room where you kind of doze off, and I'm not really sure what happened. I wake up and I'm being told he was taken to the NICU, and of course that's disappointing. Your priority is just that I hope my baby's okay. You really don't know much, and you're dying to see your baby. You just grew this thing inside of you. I think, of course, your natural instinct is to have your baby right there, and to know that they're far from you right after birth is really tough. And hormonally, you're a wreck too. So I'm in my room and I am sobbing. It's a totally different experience from what I had with Jackson, where, it's all happy and joyous, and you have family coming into the room and seeing the baby. And mind you, this was during COVID again, so there was none of that. And we're wearing masks the entire time. I remember being in labor with a mask on and giving birth with a mask on, and it was so unexpected. I came with a mask that said Jackson's mom on it, and I felt so guilty about that. But this was the earlier days, and nobody was allowed to come visit. It just didn't feel as exciting. And that was another thing. I had to get like COVID tested before I gave birth. So totally different vibes. And when you don't have the baby there and the baby is, not doing great, that's why they're in the NICU. It's, again, I would say one of those lows that can be felt during this experience, like I did with the miscarriage. Something you don't really see coming. And I'm very upset in the hospital room by myself. And eventually, once you're able to get up, it's time to go see the baby in the NICU. And my ex-husband had already seen him. And of course he says, like, he's doing great. And in all fairness, I think at the very, very beginning, you really don't know how it's going to go. These NICU babies can just surprise you so quickly. And I knew nothing at the time about the NICU. Obviously, I had heard about it and I knew what it was for. I knew there were different levels. I did know a good amount about the NICU, but not, a ton. And I definitely had no experience. And during COVID, it was very different. They only allowed one parent at a time. And you were only allowed to go visit for an hour. So it was a very isolating experience. We get to the NICU and it's pretty clear that he's not doing so well. He's really struggling to breathe, and they've got him on some high flow oxygen, and there's talks about having to sedate him. And honestly, it's all a blur, just like inserting tubes. And the NICU journey in itself, I'll do an entire episode on, but I'm just going to say that we spent 6 weeks in the NICU, and he was diagnosed with something that they call interstitial lung disease. And it was really tough to get him off that oxygen and be able to take him home. And by the end of the NICU stay, it was clear that he wasn't coming home off of oxygen. And that was a really big deal. You really didn't know what life was going to be like with a child that's on oxygen in your house and on a pulse ox monitor, which measures their heart rate and their oxygen level at all times. It's just a completely different experience. And during COVID, and having an 11-month-old. So because Shay came early, the boys ended up being 11 months apart. And when we moved to Florida, that put them in the same grade. So it's very much like raising twins. But that was my experience with my birth and my delivery and NICU story with Shay. So after that, I remember things definitely going downhill at Shay's first birthday, and around that time, I'm sure we were divorced by his second. So the next part of this story comes after my first marriage and going into my second marriage. My second ex-husband and I decided that we wanted kids. That was probably one of the things we spoke about right at the very beginning. We were both on the same page, got married really quickly, and we knew we wanted to try. And we did. And I got pregnant. It ended up being something that you call, or you don't call it, but the medical world calls it a C-section ectopic pregnancy. And it's not a typical ectopic pregnancy where you're thinking the baby is outside of the womb in the fallopian tubes or elsewhere. It sounds similar. It's just that the baby is somewhere it shouldn't be, which happens to be on your C-section scar. So it's possible, but it's not super common that the baby decides to implant there. It's kind of at random. We're watching the baby grow and we realize that it's on the scar. And because of that, the baby is not viable. It's dangerous for me. It's dangerous for the baby. I mean, it doesn't end well. So they're kind of hoping that it'll get rid of itself on its own. And I go through this very long journey of trying to, for lack of a better term, get rid of it naturally or minimally invasively. They didn't want to go in surgically because there were some logistical issues of where my bladder was located, and they were worried about puncturing my bladder, and that would have been a big problem. And it was probable that the baby would, not be alive anymore and my body would pass it. And so we waited around for that to happen, and it didn't happen. And at that point, the next step was to take a drug that is a chemotherapy drug called methotrexate. And I got a couple of rounds of that, and I was pretty sick this whole time too. I definitely had that nausea again, definitely not as intense as it was with Shay, but I think because of the medication and hormones, and it was a really weird situation in that I was pregnant with this dead baby who was, done developing at the age where he was done developing. It was a boy. We knew that. He was still in my womb. And to be pregnant for 3 months, 6 months with a dead baby definitely does something to you psychologically. It's really tough. Like, you're in the shower and know it's there, and it's a horrible thing to think about. And it's just daily. So at this point, I'm seeing a gynecologist, oncologist, if I'm saying that right. You would think that I spent enough time there that I would know what I'm talking about. But it's really horrible. So you're basically in the oncology office where it's mostly cancer patients. And during this process, it's very isolating. You spend a lot of time going to the gynecologist, and people ask you in the waiting room, like, oh, are you pregnant? Like, how far along are you? Or, different things. And that early on, while you still have a dead baby inside of you and things are being monitored, and it's hard, at least it was for me, to just kind of smile and nod and be like, So like I said, I'm pregnant with this dead baby for, let's call it between 3 and 5 months, and I'm getting this methotrexate, and that's not working. At this point, it's kind of like a waiting game. They think that eventually my body will pass it. They don't want to do what the next option is, which is a hysterectomy, because I'm 29 years old at the time. And I don't think anybody wants to take away the ability for a woman to have children at such a young age. It's definitely not something that any doctor, who gives a shit about you would want to do. And I have to say, to my doctor's kind of credit, I think that at the time I was livid that we hadn't done something more finite sooner, because it really mentally fucked with me. And I'm not sure that the doctors understand the degree to which that fucking damages you. So it was 6 months, I believe, at that point, where I had just broken down in his office one day and was like, get it out of me. It's very similar to when I wanted Jackson out of me. I was just like, I'm fucking done. I'm fucking done. I'm fucking done. And remember, my husband and I at the time were trying to have a baby. So taking away my ability to conceive is not top on our list, but this really fucked with me, and I was so over it. I was so done. I just wanted this over. I said, fuck it, do the hysterectomy. And that is what we did. The hysterectomy process was an entire thing on its own. I was separated from my husband, and I had some complications and then had internal bleeding, and it wasn't easy for me. It was painful. It was hard emotionally too, knowing that at 29 years old, my second marriage just went to shit and I can't get pregnant. While pregnancy wasn't the most enjoyable experience for me, as I know that it is for some people, it did feel like something was taken away from me. Quite literally, my organs were lost in this. It was pretty crazy. And before the actual hysterectomy and before we separated, once we decided that it was going to be a hysterectomy, I'll say I really decided because, it was my body. We had been referred to an IVF doctor and clinic and had a couple of brief experiences there. It was a world I never expected to be introduced to, having Jackson and Shay quite literally so accidentally easily. I had a lot of friends that had been going through the process or had been just starting the process, and I wasn't totally foreign to, the lingo and the process and the different groups and doctors, and I just didn't think I would be there. And we had a doctor that was monitoring, the whole situation, my ovaries and eggs before the surgery, and everything looked really good in the sense that I shouldn't have had too much trouble doing an egg retrieval and that being successful. So the only way that we could now have a baby was through an egg retrieval, and we had to create embryos, and they were going to have to be put into a surrogate because with the hysterectomy and what I had my entire uterus and my fallopian tubes removed. So you need all those components to be able to conceive and carry a child. So my body was not an option, and the only way to do it was with a surrogate. And as made obvious by, my separation before the actual operation, we were on different pages here. In both of our defenses, it came on quite suddenly, and this is not something you ever really expect, but I would recommend that people don't really get married as quickly as I did on the second time around, and note on that. But YOLO, something I would think about asking with somebody that I was thinking about having children with is like, what would you do if we weren't able to have kids on our own? This was the craziest, hardest thing that I had ever been through in my life. And that's the end of my entire trying to conceive to successfully conceiving to that's the whole story. And it's quite a full one with a lot of different experiences. So if there's anything you care to share, anything you related to, I would absolutely love to hear from you. And along with that, I would love if you share this with somebody that can relate to this and can join this community.